Welcome to the second video in the Copyright and Intellectual Property series. In this video we'll be covering the Berne Convention. Berne is the earliest example of the international framework of copyright. Berne dates back to 1886, although the last update was in 1979. Berne is administered by the World Intellectual Property Organization, commonly called WIPO. Today, there are 176 contracting parties to Berne. That means 176 countries have signed on to this international treaty. The treaty was ratified in 1886 by just a handful of countries, and the list has been growing since then. In 1928, Canada signed on. The United States is a relatively recent signatory, having jumped on board in 1989. And the list keeps growing. In 1992 is China, 2012 Vanuatu, and I've noticed that the number of contracting parties has increased since the last time I taught this course a year ago. Some key things to know about Berne, and don't worry, we'll be going over these in more detail in just a minute. It's a binding international treaty. That means it's a framework for Canadian copyright law. It covers the very broad scope of copyright. It involves national treatment, so any of the creators in any of the Berne countries have to be treated like locals in any other Berne country. Copyright is automatic. There's no formality required. There are two basic types of rights, economic and moral rights, and they don't always go together. And copyright is not absolute. Berne does allow for some exceptions, and it has a paragraph that is commonly referred to as the three-step test for fairness. Article 2 of Berne highlights the very, very broad scope of copyright. What's protected? Literary and artistic works includes every production in the literary, scientific, and artistic domain, whatever may be the mode or form of its expression. So what does this mean? If you happen to be doodling a picture on a piece of paper while you're listening to this presentation, your doodle is covered by copyright. Berne Article 3.1a covers the national treatment. Authors who are nationals of members for their works, whether they are published or not, and authors of other countries whose work first published in one of the member states. So this says two things. One is that works don't have to be published to be copyrighted, so that's one of the reasons why your doodle is covered under copyright. You don't have to publish your doodle at all for it to be covered under copyright, and not just in Canada, but in 176 countries that have signed the Berne Convention. Article 5.2 is the one that deals with automatic copyright. It says, the enjoyment and the exercise of these rights shall not be subject to any formality. So you don't have to register your work as being copyrighted, and you don't even have to put a copyright symbol on your work for it to be copyrighted. Article 6 bis 1 covers the moral rights in Berne. Independently of the author's economic rights, and even after the transfer of these rights, the author has the right to claim authorship and to object to any distortion, mutilation, or other modification, or other derogatory action in relation to the said work which would be prejudicial to his honor or reputation, and this continues after the author's death to the end of the term of economic rights. So what does this mean? Even if an author has transferred all of the economic rights in a particular work, the author still has moral rights to be recognized as the author and to object to certain uses that would be prejudicial to the author's reputation. The term of protection, and this is a minimum that every Berne country has to have. There are countries that can have more, but you can't have less, is the life of the author plus 50 years. Some types of works, such as movies, photos, anonymous or pseudonymous works, have slightly different terms. We're not going to cover all the details here, but for most of the stuff that we might work with in libraries, archives, and museums, it's the life of the author plus 50 years. Article 9, right of reproduction, is the paragraph that deals with what's called the three-step test. So this is what the whole paragraph says. It shall be a matter for legislation in the countries of the Union to permit the reproduction of such works in certain special cases, provided that such reproduction does not conflict with a normal expectation of the work and does not unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the author. So here I've highlighted the 3 steps, but we'll go over this, we'll parse it out in the next slide. Okay, first of all, it shall be a matter for legislation. What does that mean? Unlike the term of copyright, life of the author plus 50 years, where every country has to have that as a minimum, Berne allows countries to make exceptions, but it is not required. It's a bit of a conundrum because some countries have exceptions, Canada being one, but other countries don't. So number 1, special cases. So it's not something that's going to be happening all the time, that it does not conflict with a normal exploitation of the work. So the creator is not selling something anymore, they're not interested in selling it in the future. Making a copy is not going to conflict with their selling of the work. Does not unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the author. That could be a little bit more interesting to interpret in practice. There's another area of Berne that covers certain other types of exceptions, basically allows for certain free uses of works. That Berne refers to this as fair practice, and the US people refer to fair use. In Canada and UK, we call it fair dealing. So in conclusion, Canada is a signatory to the Berne Convention, and our copyright laws must conform to this treaty. The copyright scope is very, very broad, including any literary or artistic work. It doesn't have to be published. It's automatic. The creator does not have to register the work or even include an indication of copyright on the work. Creators have moral rights even when they have transferred all economic rights. And finally, copyright is not absolute. There are times when copying works under copyright without permission, according to Berne, can be considered fair. So next, it's time to move on to the exercises for copyright and intellectual property, video 2.